Thank you for bringing us all together. Thank you for what we share, and that we know that there's much more that unites us than divides us, and help us to strive to understand each other and support each other. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Pastor James. Oh, by the way, everybody, this is going to be recorded. So if you have questions at the end, know that those questions will be recorded. I'll remind people later, but at the end, just know that any questions will be recorded for the future. All right. All right.
Amen.
Amen.
So, first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining this morning. I want to thank the First Pres team. I want to thank Nancy, Nicholas, and Pastor Paul, and Julia, Terry for your invitation. I have talked with Nancy for quite some time. I consider Nancy family. I tell her I love you and there's nothing you can do about it. Pastor Paul is family as well. I pray for you all, and I know that you all pray for me. I want to thank you all. My time with First Pres is always a great time. It feels like a second home, and I can't wait to get back and worship with you all soon in person. Today's conversation, though, is going to be, let me forewarn everybody. Today's conversation is a much needed one. My style is always to be raw, uncut, but extremely authentic. I will pause for questions. I want to pause for thoughts, concerns. But today I would like to facilitate a dialogue that I think is a much needed dialogue. My condolences to the families of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all of the people who have lost a loved one to senseless violence. I also want to extend my condolences to any men and women in blue who have lost loved ones to senseless violence. I want to give you guys a little bit of my background, a little bit of my story, so that you all can know where I'm coming from. I have several friends, family members who are police officers, both black and white. One of my close friends, his name is Craig. We actually spend every Friday morning together, and we play basketball from 7 to 9 a.m. We go eat breakfast and things like that. It's our time of fellowship, and that time is guarded. And we've been doing that every Friday for over 15 years. We have not done that since March 13th, given everything that is going on with COVID-19 and then the recent outbreak. So with that said, I grew up on the south side of Chicago in South Deering. South Deering is also the back skirts, the back end of a place called the Jeffrey Manor. Are you all familiar with South Deering or the Jeffrey Manor? You guys know I'm a black preacher, so we like feedback and raise your hands and things like that. So we grew up on the south. So the Jeffrey Manor is like, it's akin to, the best way that I can put it is Cabrini Green-ish, Outgale Garden-ish, devoid of a lot of resources, a food desert. And when I was growing up on the south side of Chicago, I'll give you guys an example of something that happened on the south side when I was growing up. One day we were all walking back from school, and we decided to take a detour to the train tracks. And so we had heard that the trains were being abandoned there. And so we went to the train tracks, we took a detour, the cars were wide open, and there were opened boxes of guns. Assault rifles, 9mm, 45, AR-15s, AK-47s, there. So day one, we think, okay, this has got to be some sort of setup. Then we start hearing young men and women in the community have now taken some of those guns, and now they have them. Day two, we go back, and it looks like about 50 to 60% of the guns are missing. Now imagine, if you will, 6, 7, 8 cars just loaded with ammunition and guns, dropped off in the African-American community. Now, I had no idea that that was intentional back then until I grew up and I started hearing stories of how guns were dropped off in low-income neighborhoods and poor Black communities. I had no idea. So those are the things that I saw firsthand. One of the other things that and I think I've shared this with First Pres in my time there before, I've known from an early age that I was called to be a bridge builder, a gap filler. So my calling is to bridge the gap between races. I grew up again in the Jeffrey Manor. On one street, Bensley, you had all African Americans, completely African Americans. In the middle street, you had Calhoun, which was mixed, African Americans, Caucasians, and Latino or Hispanics. And then on the street to the east is Hoxie, all Hispanics. So you had Hispanics, mixed, African American. And the three did not get along. So as a youth, I organized a football game. It was to bridge the racial divide. It was Hispanics and Blacks. Now I was 11, 12. I had guaranteed the safety of everybody who came to the football game. Now, I didn't have the authority to guarantee anybody's safety, but I had done so. And so I think I was in 7th grade. So all of my Hispanic friends, they came to Bensley where they were all Blacks because the park was there, Trumbull Park. They came there, we played football. We got most of the way through the football game. And then an African-American young man who was in high school walked over in the middle of our game, unprovoked, and punched one of my Hispanic friends. Now, knowing what I know now, you would think that we decided to go home, right? After that took place? No. We decided to continue playing football. Only the Hispanics decided, we're done playing football, we're going home. So they left. And about 5 minutes later, you just heard gunshots ringing out throughout the entire community. We got down on the ground and you could hear bullets flying past our head. Now, my little brother, Michael, I thought he had been hit because after it all stopped, we laid there until we thought everything was clear, and he was the only person who didn't get up. So I'm shaking my younger brother, and then finally I roll him over and he pushes me off of him and says, I'm not moving until I'm sure it's clear. So we knew he was okay then. That day was the day that I was recruited into a gang later in the day. So they came back and asked, all of the Black gang leaders came back and asked, what gang are you in? So a lot of people don't know because they see the button-down shirt that I used to be in a gang and I used to lead one. I used to lead, the gang was called the Gangster Disciples. I used to lead one. I didn't join the gang because I wanted to. I joined the gang because I had no other choice. At the time, that's what I felt. I had no other choice. They lined all of the kids up who were playing football. One at a time, they asked them, are you in this gang? Everybody said yes. I was the last kid they asked, and I was not going to be the one to say no and find out what they did to the person who said no. Now, I say all of that to say, I decided to go to college. My parents are from Nigeria. I decided to, well, I didn't have a choice. My parents decided I was going to college. My parents, they did. I didn't even apply for college. I was getting recruited, and my parents decided where I was going. So I ended up going to Northern Illinois University, got my bachelor's degree in sociology, went on to lead the Association for Challenge Course Technologies, which is like the National Association of Realtors for the zipline and challenge course industry. Been around the world, seen a lot of things happening in different communities. And so when I look at the state of our nation, the state of affairs right now that's going on in the United States, I think one thought and one thought only: this was foreseeable. This was foreseeable, and this was preventable. And so I want to share, the reason I said I would do this call is I really wanted to share with my brothers and sisters from another mother, what the African American community is truly trying to say. because I believe that, I firmly believe that most people are good people. Most people are you've heard the term thrown around, racist, etc. I think the term racist is overused. I'm just going to be honest with you. I think there are some people who might be culturally unaware, or some might be culturally insensitive. I don't think the majority of the population is racist. That's my own personal feeling. So I think the term is overused quite a bit. And so I wanted to share with people who felt there, what do we do? What do we do next? How do we help? How do we join in? And what is the real plight? How many of you have ever, by show of hands, how many of you have asked that question? What's the real plight? How do we help? What do we do? Thank you, I appreciate it. So in order to do that, we first need to have a true understanding of what's being fought for and why it's being fought for in the way that it's being fought for. I won't even defend rioting. I won't defend looting. I'm against rioting. I'm against looting, but I understand why it's happening. And it's imperative that we all understand why it's happening so we can help calm it down. So here's what's being fought for. First, it's not George Floyd. He is simply the tipping point. But there's some history that African Americans know that is tough to deal with. You've got the George Floyd, you got Breonna Taylor, you've got Sandra Bland, and you've got Eric Gardner, and a host of people who have recently lost their life due to senseless violence, and many of whom have not been brought to justice for it. And that's where that's fight number one, is justice. So let me say the African American community absolutely condemns criminal activity. And we believe criminals should be brought to justice, period. With that said, it must be just across the board. I've heard people say, well, what about black on black crime? If a black man is convicted, commits a crime, is caught, and is convicted of a crime, he is punished. Oftentimes more severely. However, what the statistics are showing is if a white officer commits a crime, it's not necessarily true that he will be punished or she will be punished. That's a toss-up. And so the first fight is for justice. So when you hear people saying in marches or riots, the word you will hear often is no justice, no peace. And so we in the African American community found it really disrespectful to us, or miscarriage of justice, that they meaning the police departments, governmental agencies, were willing to arrest hundreds of protesters, but would not arrest the 4 officers. And that's what we thought, okay. When this first started happening, my phone started ringing off the hook. And I remember telling one of my good white friends, here, listen, if they would simply make arrests of the officers, this would die down immediately. And he thought, you think so? I said, yes. People are screaming, no justice, no peace. And so that's the first thing. But that is only the fruit from the poisonous tree. That is not the tree, nor is it the root. The root of this is you have a select, and I'm very careful in that word, a select group of people who want to maintain power. And because they want to maintain power, many of us, including us on this Zoom meeting today, are pawns in the game of maintaining power. Now, what do I mean by that? There is a ton of history on how we were designed. They want us fighting against one another. They want us arguing against one another. These types of conversations, they absolutely do not want to take place. Racism is a tool used in capitalism. I'm going to say that again. Racism is a tool used in capitalism. And I'm a capitalist. So if you guys, I'm going to share a couple things that a lot of people don't know about me. if you look at so I'm an independent in terms of politics. However, if you look at the types of policies that I tend to support, they tend to be Republican policies. Does that mean I agree with some of the statements made by our current president? No, but if I look at policy for policy, word for word, what I may agree with, I agree with a lot of the policies that are created. And that's just true for me. Now, so I say all that to say, I'm trying to help you understand what my thought process is like, where I see things and what I think about. Now, when you look at what's going on in today's current society, you have a lot of history behind it. I'm going to share a little bit of history. How many of you have ever heard of Black Wall Street? I see a lot of people, I see a couple people raising their hands and a lot of people shaking their heads. No. So Black Wall Street there were two towns, Ohio and I forget the other one, where in 1921, Black people had decided, you know what, we are going to create a Hinsdale or an Oak Park where we're going to fund businesses. We're going to create our own bank. There were 600 businesses. There were 30 banks. There were laundromats, movie theaters, 6 private airplanes, things like that in Black Wall Street. Now, because people were getting ahead, because Blacks were becoming independent, because Blacks were beginning to fund their own things, and I forget the year, I forget the year, but overnight, May 31st, June 1st, June 2nd, it was firebombed by what I'm going to call white supremacists. It was firebombed by people who did not want Black people to get ahead. Burned the entire Black Wall Street to the ground. And so the way to think about this, and a recent analogy came up to me. Imagine playing a game of Monopoly. Love Monopoly? How many love Monopoly? Show of hands. I mean, I grew up playing Monopoly. I used to love Monopoly. Imagine playing a game of Monopoly and playing 400 rounds and being told in 400 rounds, you can't own any you can't own property during the 400 rounds. You can't own. And then after 400 rounds, they open everything up and say, okay, now you can play. And then you play another 50 rounds and you start to make some headway. You start to see money in the bank, you start to own property, and then that's burned to the ground or the board's flipped over and I get to keep the money I had, but you don't. That is part of what the African American community is aware of and fighting for. The other thing that the African American community is fighting for, and this is critical, people think we want equality. That's not true. I am probably in the minority who feels like this, but I'm going to tell you, equality exists. Because you live in a legislative state, the laws the laws make it equal, okay? What Black people don't need is equality, we need equity. Because we're playing with a 450-year disadvantage. Here's why that disadvantage matters. Some people, their great-great-grandparents, while Blacks were being denied bank loans, were being denied access to college, were being denied financing to own businesses, some people's great-great-grandparents were given access, were given ability to own homes, were given home loans. And so everybody knows the quickest way to build wealth is through passing down real estate or life insurance to children. The quickest way for the next generation to build wealth, in addition to starting their own business. So now, the African American community realizes it has been denied access to business loans. It has been denied access to capital for homes. And now people who have been given access or been granted that access are now saying, well, things are equal. But here's why that's important. Because the school system itself is funded by state taxes. Now, if one community has homes, businesses, access to capital, and another community did not have access to capital for homes, capital for business, things like that, and you're funding schools based upon the taxes, there is a wide disparity in the funding that goes to schools in different communities. Now, I'm going to give you a personal example. My children, we live in Bolingbrook, Illinois. If you're familiar with Bolingbrook, Illinois, let me just say, the football field at Bolingbrook High School is larger than the high school itself in Austin. The football field, the middle school in Bowling, we've got like 3 middle schools. One of the middle schools in Bolingbrook is larger than Austin High School and is more technologically savvy than Austin High School and Douglas High School combined. That's not opinion, that's a fact. And so when you're funding schools based upon taxes, Bolingbrook has a Myers, a Jules. Bolingbrook has a Home Depot, Office Max. Bolingbrook has a Walmart, those types of things. Bolingbrook has hotels, and it's a thriving community. And so you're funding schools based upon those tax dollars. Austin does not have that. And I'm just giving Austin as an example because Oak Park is right next door to Austin. And so when you look at the frustration, what you're seeing is for the African Americans in Austin to buy groceries, they have to come to your community. They cannot buy, they don't have a Myers or a Pete's in Austin. So if you want fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, you got to go to Pete's. What if you can't drive? I have an employee who walks to Pete's. And when I see that, come on, hop in the car. Let's go. Who walks because that's where he has to do his grocery shopping. Do you know how frustrating that is? And so Circle Urban Ministry said, let us do something about it. We put together a coalition. We worked with the coalition, I should say. Legislators, community activists, community leaders. We put together a plan. We had schematics. We looked to secure land, and we went to CPS and the state legislators and said, listen, you guys have capital money that you can spend in the likes of $900 million. We need 12 to build a state-of-the-art high school. You know what we were told? No, you already have a high school. And we were like, come on. Would you send your kid to the school here? And I have no knock against the schools in Austin. And I'm going to say that the teachers, the principals, the administrators there are doing the absolute best they can with the resources they are given. And so what we're asking for isn't equality, we're asking for equity, because there's a large disparity in terms of a head start that has not been, the gap has not been closed. And so we're trying to throw additional programming in. Let's do social emotional learning. Let's have tutoring. Let's have mentorship. And those types of things put Band-Aid on a systematic problem. And so when you see the African American community fed up, that's what it's fed up about. So let me pause here for thoughts, questions. Oh, don't everybody be shy. Don't be shy.
James, Jim Holford. We just got through reading a book called When Helping Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And the premise of the book was that helping is more than assets and money. And so there are intangibles in terms of, you know, feelings and internal hurts, and how you deal with those internal hurts that isn't helped by just money alone. And how do you deal with that?
So that's a great question. I liken it to the story Christ told about the Good Samaritan. First of all, I want to say reading the book puts you ahead of the game. It tells me where your heart is, that you want to know, you want to help. I liken helping to the Good Samaritan. You know, one individual one who was in the ministry walked past and decided to walk across the street. Now, he didn't do anything wrong by walking across the street. He's not the one who injured the guy. So I should go back and tell a little bit more of the story. The person who was injured was in a town where in a part of town where robberies take place often. So from the way Christ told the story, it appeared as though this person had been beaten and robbed. So the man of the cloth who walked across the street isn't the one who beat him and robbed him. He just kept going about his way. The other person came around, the Good Samaritan came around and said, you know what? I can't see my brother like this and keep walking. So I'm going to lend a hand. Now, whether he paid for him the hotel room, or whether he came and sat with him and said, I feel your pain, what can I do to help? All of those things are powerful and impactful. So I've now started telling people, the African American community, we're not looking for non-racist people anymore, because we believe that the majority of the people are non-racist. We're looking for anti-racist. There's a big difference. One of them takes the posture of, hey, this sucks, but I'm not the one who did it. Let me cross the street and keep going. That is a non-racist. An anti-racist is somebody who's going to say, no. This is wrong, and I'm not going to be quiet until you realize this is wrong. And what we're seeing now is an overwhelming shift across the entire globe of people moving from non-racism to anti-racism. And what that helps us do is it helps the people who have nefarious intentions. It doesn't allow them any place to hide any longer. One of my close friends said to me, James, 90 to 95% of the police force are great people. And he said that as though that was something I should take comfort in. And my response to him is, that's actually terrifying. He said, well, why so? I said, there are 800,000 police officers in the United States. You're telling me 80,000 of them, between 40 to 80,000 of them could have bad intentions. How am I supposed to decipher which one they are? Would you get on an airplane if Delta Airlines said to you, hey guys, 90% of our pilots, they intend on landing this plane safety. The other 10, good luck. Would anybody hop on that flight? So that is how African Americans feel. We're worried. We don't know we're trying to decipher who's who. And being anti-racist helps us understand who's who. Who's who. And that's the reason now you'll notice that the African Americans aren't talking to politicians anymore. We're not beating down the door at Washington necessarily. We're coming to Naperville. They're coming to Hinsdale. They're marching in Oak Park because they want non-racist people to get involved and make it impossible for racist people to hide. That's the reason. So let me pause here for another question, thoughts, or concerns. Oh, come on now, you got me here for another.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm June. Thanks so much for being with us. Can you expand a little bit on that statement where you said that racism is a tool in capitalism?
Aha.
So I make sure I understand what you're meaning.
That's a great question. So capitalism, the primary impetus behind capitalism is to capitalize upon the pain of other people. It does not appear that way, but we always say necessity is the mother of all inventions. So you create necessity so that you can create inventions. And so when you create a need, you can then solve that need. I'm going to give you an example. In order to sell product to the military, there has to be war. There has to be war. And billions upon billions of dollars are made in business when there's war. Scale that from a macro level to a micro level. Millions upon millions of dollars are made in business when there's a war, whether it's civil or global. And so racism, division, is a tool to capitalize. It's a tool. I want you to think about this for a second. Think about the number of, the next time you watch television, think about the number of people you see on TV that are African American, that are in a position other than either being gay, lesbian, other than being LGBTQ, or, and the reason I say that is not because I'm against that or anything like that. I say that because they have a platform that they are fighting for. So they're gaining traction there. So either look at the impressions you see of African Americans that are stand-up executives and things like that. Now, I want you to contrast that to the number of white people you see on television like that. It's at least 500 to 1. When they're casting black people, they're casting you as deadbeat fathers. They're casting you as drug dealers or drug lords. They're casting you as those types of images. That's a tool. That is a tool. And it plays into the psyche of everyone watching. Everyone watching. Whether it's you, me, it plays into the psyche of everyone watching.
The characterization of capitalism being that way that's not a fair view of it, in my opinion. That's a co-opting of capitalism. That's capitalism gone bad.
I hear where you're coming from. I agree that it is a co-opting of capitalism. There are great companies who are part of the capitalistic system. The system itself is what I'm referring to, not the individuals within the system. I'll give you a perfect example of a company, KeHE Foods, part of the capitalistic system, but use the capital that they gained for absolute good. They have KeHE Cares, Christian-run organization, food distributors, helping impoverished communities all across the globe. That is the true essence of what capitalism is designed to do. However, not everybody has that sort of view. So I do stand corrected, and I agree with you. That's a co-opting of capitalism, but it also, because we live in a legislative society, it also gives people the opportunity to co-opt the system. So what I should have said is capitalism gone bad is oppressive, is designed to divide. That's what I should have said. Thank you for the correction. I agree with you there. I don't know who said it, but I agree with you.
Chuck said it. James, can you explain what happened when the trains with the guns were left in the community?
Violence went up 400%.
Talk a little more about that.
So when the trains were left in the community with guns, you started arming people who used to, when we were kids, we used to fight. If we got a disagreement, we'd stand up against each other and we'd fight it out. a day later hug it out and be gone. But when you put guns in a community of people who have less than, of people who are struggling to eat, or people who are guarding, or let me say it a different way. When you put guns in a community of people who are in survival mode, they use the guns to survive. And whether that is to defend themselves from others who are in survival mode, or to be in survival mode. Now, let me say this: most people in the communities just want to live and thrive the same way other people live and thrive. But when you put a gun in one person's hand, the other person better have one too. It's the reason the United States of America does not want other countries owning nukes. We do not want that, period.
So why,
James, can you, sorry, Nancy, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so who would leave those guns there? Why would they do that?
So we later discovered the CIA was leaving guns. The CIA in partnership, yes, the CIA would leave guns in communities. We also this is actually documented. There's documentaries and films about this. Not only did the CIA leave the guns, the CIA sold drugs in the African American community, brought the drugs to the African American community for years. Before drugs became prevalent in the African American community, the CIA was the distro. That's what we call it, the distro. They were the distribution channel. Think about it. Black people didn't own boats and planes. How would we get this stuff here from Colombia?
I just want to remind everybody before I ask my question that this is being taped. So just so that you know that your questions will be I don't mean taped because I've recorded. You know, being recorded.
Showing your age, Terry.
Yeah, show my age, right?
So why do you think they would do that?
So now, so here's that's a great question. So we've all been told that slavery was abolished, right? Well, it is unless, in the 13th Amendment, it is unless you've been convicted of a crime. And the words are, if you've been duly convicted of a crime and are in prison, slavery is actually legal. So if you want to own slaves, all you have to do is imprison people. So if you want to own Black slaves, you need to make sure they commit a crime. So let us help you commit a crime. Remember, need creates invention. We need free labor. But the only way to get free labor is if these people commit a crime. I'll help you. Let's put drugs in your community. Let's put guns in your community. Have at it. Then you heard, well, there's a war on drugs. How did drugs get to the Black community? What do you mean there's a war on drugs? We didn't have drugs in our community then. But all of a sudden, we do. There's all kinds of documentation on FBI agents, CIA agents selling drugs in large, we call bricks, large quantities, so that they can sell them. And then as they get distributed to the community, then you pass legislation to say this is illegal. Now here's a slap in the African American community face, because when things get tough, when people don't know where their next paycheck is going to come from, and people are struggling to survive, a lot of impoverished people turn to selling drugs. That's a fact. When the United States was struggling economically, when the United States needed an infusion of revenue, it turned to selling drugs. It legalized the same drug that it has imprisoned Black people for decades for. And that's not opinion, that's just fact.
I view anti-racism as a partnership. So how do we promote this partnership and make sure that it's here a year from now, 5 years from now, and 10 years from now?
So the first thing is when you see cultural insensitivity, because I won't call it racism. I have a lot of white friends who other people have called racist, and I know they're not. Some of them are culturally insensitive. When you see cultural insensitivity, we ask that you say something. That's all. We ask that you say something. We ask that you stand up for when you think something might be wrong. Say something. And listen, we're asking this of Blacks and whites and Latinos. I have been guilty for decades of keeping my mouth shut. Nancy will tell you, I usually don't say anything when these types of things happen. I just go on about my business because I'm like, it's not my place to say anything. I want to stay quiet. So I have been just as guilty. So the way to partner, the first thing is when you see cultural insensitivity, say something. The other thing is to start reading up on injustice. What is happening in the African American community? So I think you're ahead of the game. You've decided I'm going to educate myself. I'm going to start reading up because you got to know we are not at this level of anger because a guy had his knee, because a cop had a knee on the neck and the guy died. Yes, that is awful. We hate it. It enrages us. But to the level that we're acting now, you gotta know that there's a mountain of things or an iceberg of things underneath that. And so starting to understand what that is. And then here's the most important thing, building a relationship with the African American community. Not just donating, but building a relationship. And this is why I love First Pres, because you all are ahead, you all are doing that. If you don't know, Nancy, for example, and sorry, Nancy, I'm gonna put you out there. Nancy volunteers her time at Circle Urban Ministries. Does not have to. We're not paying her to, she volunteers. And doing that, she has gotten to know the men and women of Circle Urban Ministries. The men and women of Circle Urban Ministries have gotten to know Nancy and love Nancy. And so when Nancy's not there, we're looking, where's Nancy? When's Thursday? Nancy's coming on Thursday. So building a relationship, it is through that kind of relationship that authentic dialogue can take place, and then empathy and understanding can take place. And you build partnership through relationship.
James, can you talk a little bit, maybe summarize the idea behind Blackout Tuesday and practical ways that we can identify Black leaders in our community and use our influence to support them?
So what Blackout Tuesday is, we know that we have buying power in the African American community, but we have struggled to use it. We have not, in one collective voice, used it. And so what Blackout Tuesday is, so there's been two of them. There's been multiple ones going around. But Blackout Tuesday is July 7th, 2020. I'm a part of a group of over 1.5 million African American leaders who are organizing. What Blackout Tuesday is a way to say we're not spending any money in white-owned businesses, period. And so the country is going to feel the economic impact of the African American community, and therefore we know that it listens to money. It listens to the economic impact. And so that is what it's about. And the way that you can support Black leaders is when those types of things come up, stand in solidarity. Think about this for a second. This is the first time that Major League Baseball, basketball, NBA, major professional football, soccer, and everybody says Black Lives Matter. We were peacefully saying this 5 years ago. Colin Kaepernick was saying it in 2017. Now, because it's affecting the country economically, everybody's listening. And that, you got to know, that's what it feels like to the African American community. That the only thing the United States listens to is when it's impacted economically. And let me be very clear. When we say the United States, we don't mean our brave men and women who are standing beside us. We mean systematically, the systemic problems. The only way the systemic problems will change is if there is a financial impact to force it to change. And so you saying, I'm not supporting a business that is not supporting Black leaders. If you saying, I'm not supporting a business that is treating Black people unfairly, that's how change happens. Because they won't listen to us, but they will listen to you. You got to know that's how we feel. They won't listen to us, they will listen to you.
James, how are you identifying the businesses where you would encourage folks at this church and the Black community to spend on July 7th?
So I will send over a list that we have. So we have a list of Black-owned businesses, but I will also send over a little bit of a write-up of what is Blackout Tuesday and what it's for. We want to shut the country down economically. We're not spending money, period. Black-owned businesses know this, so they're preparing for it. We are not spending money, period. I know July 7th I won't be. To be really honest with you, what the leaders are calling for is the whole week. Don't celebrate the 4th of July, any of that. I don't know that that's going to pass amongst the group, but that's what everybody's calling for. We're saying this cannot happen anymore.
What about white-owned or conglomerate-owned businesses who do support the Black community?
We're not spending money, period.
Oh, on anything? Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Can you talk a little about how we can use our social media to amplify the voices of the leaders of color?
Yes. And so we're saying 1 billion, that'll get somebody's attention. That'll get somebody, yeah. On the streets. I love that he changed the street to Black Lives Matter. I don't know if it's lane or street. Yes, great, fine. We need schools funding changed. No, there's no more throwing a cookie and saying, okay, here, go sit down and eat. No. We need the entire system to. Let me tell you what the leaders are saying. People ought to be thankful that Black people just want equity and not revenge. That's a tough thing to hear, but it's absolutely what it's being said. And so to a group of people who these types of things have happened to still be looking, to still be asking is a testament to the peaceful nature of, inherently peaceful nature of the African American community. You are seeing very different images on television, social media, than what true African American culture is about. Because if what they're showing on television was truly who African Americans are, this entire country would have been burned to the ground. Because Black people would have wanted revenge. And that's just not the nature of Black. We inherently, at our core, want peace, justice, and equity, fairness. That's what we want at our core. If we were any other kind of people, if we were the kind of people that we're being described as, this whole country will be burned to the ground. And that's just not the African American community. And so that is something I really want, I hope, if you don't hear anything else from me, hear that. The true nature and culture of the African American community is for peace, unity, tranquility, harmony. That's who we've always been.
James, I just reread Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail in 1963. It's a marvelous letter to read, and at the same time, it's devastating because of his brutal, honest comments about the failures of the white churches. Do you think there's been any progress from white churches since 1963?
No, and I hate to say it that way, and here's why. White churches economically have the power to change the entire system. No question. If for example, the Vatican and the white church got together, the system would change overnight. Overnight. And I want to point out that Martin Luther King was assassinated marching peacefully. And you should go do the history. I encourage everybody to go research who killed Martin Luther King, not who pulled the trigger, who orchestrated the death of Martin Luther King. It is on record that the government has been convicted of being culpable in his assassination. And so when people ask or look for where are all the Black leaders to stand up and galvanize the entire nation, we know that the one who did it had been killed by the government. We know that history. They don't teach it in the books, but the internet is right at our fingertips. And so we can look this information up now. But to answer your question, there hasn't been, well, let me walk myself back for a second. There has been progress. There has not been enough significant progress made, because we're now having these conversations openly. We're now having these dialogues openly. There are hundreds of white pastors across the globe who are listening to African-American preachers who are saying, I want to stand with you. But we know that if it was impacting your son or your daughter, you would march to the Capitol with legislature in hand, and some of my white friends, assault rifles in hand, and demand change. That's the reason we're now talking to you and not the government.
James, there's a lot of stuff out on the internet that's a lot of garbage. How do we judge what is really true about Martin Luther King, about anti-racism, and about some of the things that you've talked about? Can you send us any readings of things that you think are appropriate and true is not exactly the right word, but something that would educate us without further taking us down the wrong trail?
I'd be happy to. It's going to take me a couple of days. I want to make sure I pull together some really helpful and impactful information. I appreciate you saying that. There is a lot of information that is untrue, but there's also a lot of information that is absolutely. I want to share some of that with you all. I appreciate that. Ryan, you had a question?
Yes. First, I just wanted to say thank you so much for doing this for us. I've learned a ton listening to you. In particular, I'll say, like, I knew that drugs got in the Black community somehow. Like, there was a time when there weren't, and then there was a time that were, and I didn't know how that happened. And you've just piqued my interest in learning more about that very dark sort of story that you told there. I wanted to, so thank you. But I wanted to share a thought with you and then get your reaction to it, kind of based on your monopoly description, because that resonated with me a lot when, I think about how the Black community is where they are because of racism, which is said quite often. My understanding has been along the lines of that monopoly game. So like in the late 1800s, we knew who the racists were. We knew what they were doing. The laws were on the books. They were being enforced both through the government as well as just through regular interaction. I mean, Black people were slaves at that point. Then there's some government reform, but how does the situation really change? We get Jim Crow. We still have segregation. We still have the Black Wall Street example and the bands of white people that go into these Black communities that are succeeding and put people down, and in some cases, as another thing I learned from you, burn them to the ground. We get Civil Rights Act, but those are the 400 turns of monopoly where you're not allowed to play. Okay, now you're allowed to play. You're so far behind that the flywheel is spinning so fast in the white community just because that's how wealth works. it's impossible to achieve that sort of equity based on where people are or where they're starting from. We see all that with the benefit of hindsight in history. My question to you is, there's still a lot of rhetoric today about systemic racism or underlying structures that are keeping Black people down. And when I look at it, I see a lot of what appears to me to be advances. And so, you know, there's affirmative action programs at every major university. There's the magnet schools in Chicago. There's lots more attention being paid to these issues, and definitely, you know, more in the past like 3 weeks than there's been hardly ever. But, you know, from where I sit, I don't have the benefit of the hindsight to look back and say it's these laws and these people doing this that caused what was putting people down. And I'm hearing language that makes it sound like there are things presently happening that are similar to Jim Crow, the new Jim Crow, if you will. You know, there's things happening presently that are like that or like slavery. And I will fully admit to you, I don't know what those are or to what extent that's true. And so I wanted to get your reaction to that and say, what's the equivalent situation that we're experiencing today, if such a thing exists? Or is this just the flywheel spinning so slow, we were set back 50 years ago, there's just no recovering from that?
Ryan, that is a magnificent question. If I was in your presence, I would just give you a high five. That is a magnificent question. Here, it is happening today, and I'll give you an example. You all know the Paycheck Protection Program that came out, the CARES Act that came out. It was documented in round one, 95% of the funding, where do you think it went? Well, let me say it a different way. Where do you think it didn't go?
I hear you. It didn't go to the Black community.
It did not. And so we have application numbers. So I was in the first like 3,000 applicants. I was in the first 5,000. Didn't get funded in the first round. After all of the first round funds were taken, they came around with, oh, you know what? See, this is where it started to bubble up. Black people all over the United States started going off because now we can easily communicate with one another to say, wait, did you get any money? No, I didn't. Did you get any money? I know you're working with the school systems. No. Hold on a second. There's no way your business didn't get any money. No. And so now we're saying, okay, to our congressmen, our state, you need to do something, or, you know, we're going to be unhappy. That's one. Another one that's still redlining. Look up redlining. How many of you have ever driven past the Cabrini Green community? Beautiful looking community now, isn't it? No African Americans. It was a project before. When they decided we want to put money into this community, we want to take over this land, they said, you know what, African Americans, here's a $1,200 voucher, go somewhere else. Took the property, tore it down, and built beautiful housing. So it's still happening today. Here's another way systemic racism is still happening. Our schools are still being underfunded. Every day we walk into the Austin community, we look and we see schools that are underfunded. One of the schools, and I won't say which one, in 2018 had a freshman enrollment of 1. School in African American community. 1 student enrolled in that school. You cannot run a school that way. You don't have the funds, you don't have the resources to run the school. So those are the things that it's still taking place to this day. What is most openly seen are the things where you see police brutality. Police brutality is what you can film. That's filmable. But what's unfilmable was when we're applying for loans, we're applying for grants, and they're looking and deciding where your zip code is and see if they're going to fund it. That's unfilmable. I can't put that on film. But I know it's happening because it happened to me directly.
Well, James, you've gone to the school example several times. That seems to me you need to change the property tax code throughout Cook County and the state of Illinois for that matter. Where's the political clout going to come from? How do you go about? We've been trying to change the tax code for property taxes for years.
That's right.
That's start to this whole systemic issue. How do you go about doing that?
See, we don't have the resources. So you're asking an oppressed people to use, because in order to change tax code, you've got to have funds to lobby. That's just, there's no other way around it. You're asking oppressed people to pull resources together that they don't have in order to lobby to Congress that doesn't listen to them. So I will say this, if the tax code, if they decide to flip the tax code on its head today and say, you know what, to the neighborhoods who make the most money, we're going to take your tax dollars and we're going to fund the impoverished communities, and we're going to use the funds from the impoverished communities to fund your schools, you'd see change immediately. You'd see change immediately because people will get up and ensure that that doesn't happen. So the cloud is there in a different community. And this is why I answered the question about, do we feel like there's progress that the white church is making? Because if the problem was at the doorstep of the people who had the resources to solve it, they would solve it in a heartbeat.
James, one of the things that's been identified as a way to solve this problem, and it's on the NAACP list of demands for change, is defunding the police. What do you think about that?
I think that's incredible. That's insane. I can see why I can see why defunding the police, and I'm looking for it now because I have that as well. I can see why defunding the police might seem like the right thing to do. I think it's an emotional response. Defunding the police leaves complete and utter chaos. But I do think that restructuring who pays for lawsuits against the police is different. I think like doctors, lawyers, police officers should have malpractice insurance or something of that nature. So if you get sued, nobody's picking up your tab. And that's what the Black community is saying. Right now, you have qualified immunity. By the way, we're saying that needs to be gone. Qualified immunity you need to get rid of qualified immunity. So don't defund the full police department, restructure the police department's training, restructure the police department's union guidelines. Those are the types of things that we're saying need to be restructured. But defunding the police is not something I'm a fan of. We've got very good police in Bolingbrook. Please don't defund the police statewide.
Hey, James.
Well, I hate to bring this party to a close, but we are getting close to the end. I want to respect the speaker's time and the time of people that came. James, I want to thank you once again for being very willing on short notice to come talk to us and from your heart. And I'll say a quick closing prayer. Dear God, help us to look for ways to do it better. I mean, you gave us models to do it, but help us to see exactly what you want us to do, and help us to reach out as partners, as brothers to all races, and to really, really look for ways to seek justice and equity. Hear me pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all for taking the time to listen. In Raleigh, Washington, and Glenn K. Ryan's book, Breaking Down the Walls, which I recommend as a read. It's a book Circle Urban Ministries published. It's called Breaking Down the Walls. I think you can find it on Amazon, as well as I think we just ordered about several hundred copies of it. I think it's important to understand empathy. That's one of the tenets of the book. And you all taking an opportunity to listen is huge. It's critical. It shows your heart. It shows your character. It shows the integrity of your leadership, and it shows the passion and compassion of the First Pres family And I won't forget that. And I told my team I was coming on with you all, so they won't forget it either. I just want to thank you all and let you know that Circle Urban Ministries loves you. On behalf of our board, our team, my family, and me personally, thank you.
We are not finished. We will be having more dialogues, we hope. So stay tuned.
Nancy, we have dialogue every week, but I can't wait to have it with I can't wait to have it with the rest of you all as well.
Thanks,
Thank
James.
you.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Take
Thank you.
care. God bless.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you.